right, Arthur, we're back. How are you?
Fantastic. How are you?
Good. It's like 68 and sunny, and yeah, good here. Good life in Arizona in the spring.
It's raining.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We're going to do a couple things today, but first, we're going to bring in our friend Byron Anderson to tell us to translate what in the heck Fed Chair Powell said. All I know, Byron, is I heard transitory somewhere in that discussion. So I want to know what you think and what you heard.
Well, the tariff part of it I'll leave to Arthur, but that's what Powell was talking about. So the question that he was asked on transitory was, he said initially that what you're going to see is tariff inflation will be transitory over the short term, and we'll get back. And he was talking about the economic projections that the Fed puts out, that you are seeing the Fed stay consistent throughout their projections, and this is just kind of a blip. If you listen to what he was talking about in his speech, the Fed sees solid data. They don't really see any severe downturn is unlikely. Lower growth, higher inflation, but again, it wasn't big moves. It was small moves, kind of picking around the edges.
So he agreed with us.
He agreed with what we've been saying, correct? Yeah. And he was asked the question about where inflation expectations were coming in the economic projections, and he flat out said it's coming from tariffs. A good part of it is tariffs, and they can't really parse out the difference between tariffs and non-tariffs. So the job market, he said, job to worker gap is steady, low hiring, low firing, new jobs being created are healthy. Nothing he said kind of showed panic in the markets today, which was a good thing. Finally. The one thing that I always I'm not a Fed lover. I dislike what the Fed has done over the last 15 years, mostly because in the late teens, they basically put bond traders out of business. But I'm not holding that personally against them, at least Fed, or at least Powell. But he did say inflation's moderating, which is kind of funny because we've had 40 months of above trend inflation, and none of this is a panic for the Fed. But when when PCE was running at 1.6, we had to put trillions of dollars into the economy to get it to 2. So there's this odd balance with the Fed.
Yeah, no, I 100%. Listen, I've used up every smart aleck comment I can on the Fed, like time to replace the Fed with Chat GPT, driving through the rearview mirror,
right?
And on it goes. So at one point I called him the something savant, the savant idiot, or the idiot. I don't know. It's a new phrasing of the old phrasing. But I guess what I'd like to know too is, like, the market seemed to rally on the QT statement. Could you just explain that to our viewers, what he did and why it's important, what they said?
Yeah, and I think that was an important thing, especially for the bond market. So what they did was they slowed QT for just the Treasury. So the roll off on Treasuries went from 25 billion a month to 5 billion a month. That's a lot of money that they get to reinvest back into Treasuries now. So you saw the long end rally. And the other thing it does is solve any possible liquidity hiccups, which is what we've been talking about for 2 months now, is that, or longer, that QT is ultimately going to cause or could possibly cause a problem. So I think you got some certainty in equity markets. I think you got some certainty in bond markets that take a little of that liquidity panic out of there.
Okay, good. Yeah, so we're back in the liquidity game. And how big is the Fed balance sheet now, approximately?
I still think it's 6 trillion. I think,
yeah,
I don't know what the exact one, but it's still a lot of money. And if you look, well, and there's an interesting thing I wrote about this a while ago, is that the long trend of Fed balance sheet was around 5% of GDP is what they used to put into the markets for and it was always short liquidity. We got to a peak of 36.9% of GDP was the Fed balance sheet. We're still at 23% of GDP as the Fed balance sheet. There's a lot of excess liquidity that's in markets still. So I think some of this, we're going to have a panic and we're going to see liquidity kind of just dry up is maybe a little farcical.
Okay. A little dramatic.
Yeah.
How much are they taking out of the market in agencies every month?
So that's 35 trillion, and that stayed. So that number stayed. They didn't do any changes to agencies or agency CMBS.
And those are pretty much predominantly mortgage backs, right?
Mortgage backs and low coupons. A lot of if you look at their balance sheet, a lot of that stuff is very low coupons, under 3% coupons. So my personal thought is they basically took the losses that the markets would have to take on those when they raised rates, and now the Fed is giving it to taxpayers. So,
but now they're giving a bill to taxpayers, right? Technically, because if they're low coupons, rates are a lot higher now than where they bought them, and they're continuing to sell them. They're actually realizing losses on their balance sheet, aren't they?
Correct, and we're seeing that on what the Fed is remitting to Treasury is negatives. I think it was 250 billion so far is what it was stacked. I'd have to look at the exact number, but it's a lot of losses going back to Treasury now too. So adds to our deficit.
Doing what government does best.
Yep, waste money.
Okay.
Wow.
Well, thank you. Anything else, Arthur, you wanted to ask Byron? Like how tall is he, or I don't know.
I know the initial kind of fear was that you're going to hear the word stagflation. I find it, by the way, Nancy, really, really ironic that he actually even uttered the word transitory. Like, if there's any word that the Fed shouldn't take out of the dictionary, that's the word. Especially this Fed chairman.
Yeah.
And the Bloomberg reporter tagged him on it. One of the Bloomberg reporters, I didn't write his name down, but he was all over Powell about it. He's like, oh, so last time when you said transitory and it didn't turn out to be transitory, and Powell shot back with a smarmy little remark about, well, you mean last time we had tariffs, or you mean COVID? Yeah. So
that's exactly what he was referencing.
Exactly.
It was when you were trying to keep your job.
Right. Yeah, you forwent raising rates and let inflation boil out of control so you could get reappointed. That time? Yeah. All right. Well, thanks so much, Byron.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rain.
Appreciate it.
So Arthur, I'm in my new digs. What do you think about all the books I have behind me?
I think it makes you look very smart.
I know. I wanted to show how well read I am.
My bookshelf's actually on the other side of the monitor, so you can't see the millions of books I have. Of course, they're all comic books.
As you know, I actually do, but it's like, oh, I can't even bear the thought of unloading them, packing. Okay, so listen, I want to hear, you gave a really great talk earlier this week on the economy, what's going well, what's not going well. And so I was hoping you could share that with our viewers, because I thought it was super interesting and comforting.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy. So what I want to talk about is the four kingdoms of macroeconomics. And the reason that I think it's important now is because I think it was interesting that when you're listening to people, I was listening to CNBC at a time, and even Powell talking about tariffs and how they're not quite sure how to incorporate them into their forecasts. They think it's inflationary, but it's it's a transitory inflationary, which is great. Which actually makes sense too. Like you wouldn't expect the price to keep going up. If you raise the tariff, you get the price increase, and then that's it from the tariff effect itself. But what's interesting is what does that mean for the economy? GDP is a quarterly number, so it's really an analysis of what's happened over a 3-month period. So it's a flow of activity, right? Every month, and some numbers we get are monthly, and like consumer sentiment, which obviously doesn't look very good right now, and it's because people are trying to digest all the changes. I mean, it really has been breakneck since January 20th. Some on the immigration front, all these other areas. We care mostly about things that affect stock market, bond market yields, the value of the dollar, and foreign exchange. So I thought I'd go through what I've always taught, the 4 kingdoms, or the 4 pillars, as we sometimes call them. And it's fiscal, monetary, trade, and incomes. And incomes is a weird word, but fiscal is basically taxing the spending of the federal government. Monetary policy, that's the Fed. So it's the value of the dollar, interest rates, inflation, and employment. Trade, which obviously is a big issue, and unusually, incomes policy is actually a really big issue. And incomes policy and macroeconomics is really, it's all the indirect ways that government influences the economy. So think regulations, restrictions, and requirements. Okay, I'm going to go over each kind of one of these areas, talk about what things that we know. What is, I think, the famous Rumsfeld known knowns or unknown knowns, the things we do know now, or we believe are going to come to fruition, versus the things we're not quite sure what's going to happen. So you see, I've got 2 green boxes and I've got 2 of the orange ones, which are the wait and see. So taxation, Nancy, you and I have talked about it. The president is probably going to get an extension of the original tax cuts that he did back in 2000. What was it? What was
17.
Which lowered capital gains tax, income taxes. We get immediate depreciation of capital. So you go out and buy a truck, you can expense it immediately.
Huge.
These are great things for stocks.
Did you catch that? I said huge.
Huge.
Hugely, bigly.
Oh, Fifi, bigly. So taxation, I don't see any taxes increases for sure on the horizon. I see it permanent, making permanent the Trump 1.0 tax cuts. And he's still pushing for no tax on tips, overtime, and possibly interest for U.S. manufactured autos. And again, 100% expensing in the first year of capital purchases. So
and
those
Social
are all.
Security still Social Security. No tax on Social Security.
I think he's talked about that. That's going to be a really hard one to push through.
I don't want to derail you. Keep going.
The static loss on those lower end taxes, that they're just flat out revenue negative. So you just lose money. You don't get a lot of supply side incentive effects by doing stuff like that. But I'm sure they could try. But I, with the budget the way it is, I just don't see them pulling off. Honestly, I don't see them pulling off tips either, to be honest with you.
Okay.
Because that's ordinary income. It's just hard to calculate. On the spending side, look at Doge, whether you like them or whether you like Elon and what he's doing, the Department of Government Efficiency. They're cutting by getting rid of government employees. Government employees get paid from taxation. So when you cut government employees, you cut costs that the government has to outlay to hire those people and pay them, and benefits and all that other fun stuff. Mm-hmm. That's actually good on the from an economic standpoint, from a spending standpoint. So you're cutting taxes, you're cutting spending. That's good. Deficits are going to become, one of these days we're going to wake up and that's all we're going to talk about is debt and deficits. So the more we get ahead of this issue, the better. And the ways you kind of address deficits, you can try to grow your way out of it, like make the economy grow faster. You can reduce spending, or you can try to raise taxes. You usually don't get faster growth when you raise taxes, or you can do some combination of those. And that'll change the trajectory of the economy, and you can address spending that way. But we are going to have to address spending sooner, not later.
Right, 100%. So let me just interject, because I think one of the things that we keep hearing, and you referenced it, was that consumer sentiment is very bad. And yet, and Byron talked about this on our webinar for our clients, and I've talked about it on the air. I think you've talked about it too, that a lot of this is being pulled down. You know, there's more Democrats than there are independents and Republicans, and the Democrat expectations in the University of Michigan sentiment number went from 91 or 94% down to 28, the lowest on record. And so I think that is skewing some of the sentiment numbers. But what was so interesting to me was that Brian Moynihan, who's the CEO of Bank of America, came out today and said, and this is in line with what Jamie Dimon said. He said about a week ago that the consumer was back to normal. So back to normal. And then Brian Moynihan said that spending is increasing. So, from the consumer. So it's so interesting. It's like the tale of, we know the low end consumer is suffering, but now energy prices are coming down. We get tax cuts, as you're rightly pointing out. This really could be a boon in the second half of the year to GDP, which, by the way, has now been revised down to negative 1.8%. And that's all because of the front end loaded imports, but it was 2.8% just 2 weeks ago, negative 2.8%. So as you said, it's improving. Yeah, sorry.
And I would point out, sentiment is exactly what it says it is. It's how people feel. It's their perceptions of what's going on and whether they think are better or worse. So it's how people feel. And when you have all this change, some people like it and some people don't. So it's not surprising you have these big swings. Now, whether it's Democrat or Republican or conservative and liberal, whatever the characterization is, yes, actually that makes perfect sense that people are either much more optimistic or a lot less optimistic based on where they were coming from before. And then I made a point here about interest on the U.S. debt is just the interest payments from the interest, which you've talked about quite a few times in the past. It's 13% of all federal outlays spending. So look at the more we get the economy growing, the less debt we have, the more we get our fiscal house in order, the better it is for everybody because it just reduces future tax increases to pay for all this stuff. And if you remember, the last president who actually really cut government spending as a percent of GDP was
Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton. So it doesn't matter what party. It's what about, it's about running a company. Country is really just a giant company.
Yep.
That doesn't use GAAP. Monetary policy
money every year. Yeah.
We obviously, Byron was just talking about the Fed. They're not going to cut the federal Fed funds rate. Interest rates on the 10-year stay around 4.3, 4.5. They're kind of range bound, it looks like. Value of the dollar, it's not surprising the dollar has gotten weak the last month or so. It's been on a tear for the last couple of years. But the problem with the value of the dollar foreign exchange is clarity on policy. Economic policy, I think, is really what's hurting the U.S. dollar and the foreign exchange right now. As we get more clarity on policy, the dollar will be able to figure out which way it needs to go against other currencies. It's interesting, Nancy, because we talked about the elections in Germany recently, and Germany is just expanding their spending. Like, they just took basically the debt cap off. And you should expect to see that throughout all of Western Europe as they basically build out their militaries. Huge defense and infrastructure spending going on in Germany. Expect everybody else to do it too. That actually should be pretty bullish for the dollar and not good for the euro on the FX side. So I think I still like dollar here in the longer term. And then inflation, it is coming down, but it's not coming down to that 2% rate. It continues to hover up around the 3% rate. And you're right, with the tariffs talk, that's going to short term at least push up prices in those areas that are most affected by any tariffs that actually get implemented. That'll make, I think, inflation look a little bit hotter than it would have otherwise.
But just heralding back to what we've been talking about for 2 years now, this environment is analogous to the 90s. And we had inflation of over 3% during the second half of the decade. I think actually for the entire decade. So if you've got productivity, which we've talked about a lot, you can handle and digest 3% inflation if you continue to improve productivity. And so far, so good.
Well, especially if it's staying at around 3. If it's going from 3 to 12, that's the problem, because
that's transitory.
That's right. It's the purchasing power. It's what the consumer feels it. So if your pay is going up by 5%, inflation is up by 3%, you should be feeling like you can purchase more. with it, devalued dollars from inflation. So absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And then the third point is going to be that trade issue. So we're waiting to really see how these trade and tariff issues play out. And it's interesting because there's really three types, three ways. I'm going to go back to the first slide. You get reciprocal tariffs. That's where another country is taxing, like Europe taxes our cars at 10% when we try to export to them. We tax their cars on a tariff basis, 2.5%. The president saying, hey, some of these things are going to be reciprocal, i.e., if you tax us at 10, we're going to tax your cars at 10. So we're going to, if you want to lower them to 5, we'll lower them to 5. Punitive is where we're basically putting tariffs on China. It's not about fairness. It's about the fact that we've got issues with China overall. And so these are punitive. And I think the more interesting thing is I believe the president overall would like to reduce the level of tariffs. It's interesting that you've got the UK, Mexico, India talking about expanding trade with the US. They don't want to get in a fight. I think Trump even mentioned a trade umbrella, extending like NAFTA, the NAFTA type structure to either all of South and Central America, maybe even the UK, and getting more places for US manufacturing, which hopefully keeps expanding here, more markets to sell into, and more fair trade where we're not paying 300% import duties trying to get dairy into Canada. It hurts Canadians, by the way. It doesn't just hurt US dairies, it hurts Canadian consumers. So I think that's a wait and see. We got to see what actually gets done and at what rates and how many goods and services are covered. And the next slide, I'm going to talk about a little bit more about the three issues. But the last one is actually, I think, the coolest one because it's the one that's very rarely talked about. And incomes policies, what's happening now, could really be considered almost exactly like a tax cut. So if you look at regulations, restrictions, requirements, you've got a huge cut to regulations, restrictions, and requirements. You get the EPA, you got DOGE, education, you got Treasury, energy. You're seeing costs and the cost of doing business in these areas collapsing. That's going to act like a tax cut to a greater or less degree, depending on what we're talking about here. This is potential for huge regulatory reform, and I mean reform as in costs going down. That makes, by the way, U.S. manufacturers have much more competitive in the global environment if they have to pay less prices here at home to do business. And then you've got consumers are going to benefit because those prices should come down and actually help drive inflation down more. Hopefully we get negative prints and get prices trying to go back to where they were 4 years ago.
Wouldn't that be great?
Oh, great for the consumer.
So what our viewers don't know is that you're like a real foodie and you grow your own stuff and you guys have a farm and you grow cattle. And so I was thinking about getting chickens, but and I went to get them and they were out. Believe it or not, in Scottsdale, they were out of chickens. So I had to put an order in. I just canceled it because egg prices
collapsing.
Yeah. It's awesome. Okay, go. We're running.
I was gonna say, by the way, also if you buy chickens and you buy like 3, they're really, really expensive per egg. They're a lot of fun, but you're not doing it to save money. Trust me.
I take care of them. I don't think they're fun, especially when you step. Well, never mind. Okay, so get to your chart because we're running short.
Yeah, last chart is actually just an example of steel, aluminum, and auto tariffs and kind of where trade stands in the U.S. So the chart on the left. It's the top 10 auto. It's the top 10 auto importers into the U.S. You got Mexico at number 1, and Mexico's got about in 2022 exported $50 billion worth of auto and auto parts to the U.S. We exported about $4.5 billion to them. Interesting. Look at Japan. Japan exported almost $41 billion of autos and auto parts, and we didn't even break $1 billion. South Korea, 38 billion sent to us, 2/3 of $1 billion, say $640 million of U.S. exports to Korea. So what the president's saying is, hey guys, this is clearly not fair. Our cars are just as good as your cars, if not better, and we should have equal access. So these are kind of just showing you how the disparity and how our U.S. manufacturers are getting taken advantage of. Germany also, look at 25.6. We export $9 billion to Germany. I also put on the very bottom, the EU exported almost 40 billion in autos. So 65% of that number is coming from Germany, which isn't surprising, to the US, and we exported 9.2 as of 2022. So that's a 4-to-1 differential. Steel, you look at Canada, #1 exporter to the US, then Brazil and Mexico. So it's no wonder we're targeting those guys, and that South Korea is kind of a distant fourth. Aluminum, aluminum's a different story. Canada's up here at the top. And Nancy, we talked about this. The Mexico and Canada, because of NAFTA, originally NAFTA, they are really, really exposed to us as being their #1 trade customer, much more so than we are to them as a percentage of total trade that they have. So they're at a huge disadvantage negotiating with us, and we're trying to play hardball. Canada has decided it wants to play hardball. It looks like Mexico is like, hey, like, we like doing business with you. Let's just figure this out. It's interesting how the different parties are kind of handling this. EU has decided they're going to slug it out with us. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, wait and see, as you say.
Yeah.
I think it's hilarious too that the numbers that you've shown and just the disparity and how much advantage that we have. Now, I don't think it helps. I heard the president again was talking about the 51st state and how Canada really was destined to be. I mean, no wonder they're slugging it out. It's like a matter of personal pride and national pride. So maybe when he cuts back on that, and maybe that is a strategy. I really don't know. I can't get inside his head, but
I think he should try to pick off a province. Like, forget about trying to negotiate with Canada. I'd go to Toronto, like maybe like Alberta, and say, hey, want to join the US? Secede, and we'll make it worth your while.
It's so nuts, some of the stuff we're talking about. All right. Well, thank you for that. Super helpful. And I think really supports our view that this sell-off in the market is not fundamentally driven. It's more sentiment and maybe somewhat valuation, though I could argue that valuations are modest in comparison to the 1990s, where we had 5 years in a row of +20 to +35% returns in stocks. So I think we're going to shift it to a break or to the final segment. That was a question.
And by the way, the thing to point out, which I think is what the Fed was talking about, people should be prepared for a little volatility here, because what's going to happen with these changes, it causes timing shifts and volume shifts in the economy, which shows up in GDP, consumer sentiment. So what you're seeing is the natural kind of frothiness of all of these changes going on. It's showing up in sentiment, it's showing up in GDP, it's showing up in PPI, CPI, it's showing up everywhere.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, we're going to go to break, and we'll come back in just a minute. I actually have those shoes.
I'm going to play that at your retirement party. That's going to be like everywhere. gonna make bobbleheads out of you.
One of the things my daughter always says to me when we're doing stuff, she's like, "Oh wait, let me get a picture of that. I'm going to put it in your slideshow." You know what the slideshow's for, right? It's when you're gone. All righty. I wanted to talk today about Starbucks. I picked two names from our ETF, TGLR, and I did that because I think mostly what I tend to talk about on this X live stream is growth names, and we do have a growth strategy, and we like a lot of tech, and we own tech in TGLR as well. But I talk a lot about tech, and we were buying. I just want to point that out. We were adding to a number of our tech names last week and this week, or this week and this week. And so that, I'm sorry, last week and this week, Jiminy Christmas. And so that's a fact, but I really like this name for the following reasons. So the chart that's up shows the price performance over the last year, and it's not super impressive, up 8.3%. But if you look at it over the most recent period, when Brian Niccol was announced as the CEO, what you'll see is a big gap up, and that's you can see it in the chart, and that from that point, the stock is up about 28%. And so this is the importance of having an excellent CEO. And at LTI, at Laffer Tengler, we actually have 12 fundamental factors that the analytical team looks at. And they're the two most important, in my view, are the quality of management and the catalyst for outperformance. And so Brian Niccol, as many do know and some don't know, used to be the CEO of Chipotle, which is a member of our 12 Best Ideas portfolio. But when he left, we were pretty confident that Chipotle would remain a growth story and a darling, because the hard work, the heavy lifting had been done, and it was his management team that's now running the company. With Starbucks, he started to bring in people he's worked with at former employers, and he's made a number of changes that I think are really important. So first and foremost is he brought in his own team. So you're seeing a big shift in the C-suite. There was also an announcement that they're going to lay off about 1,100 employees, and they are saying, and I think this is for Washington purposes, regulatory purposes, it's not to save money, but it's to recalibrate. So that's important. So they're making quick decisions more quickly, or quickly. And see, I don't have any books. I can't double check how that's supposed to be said, but they're making decisions in a really market-based way, and they're doing it quickly. And then in addition to that, there's some tea leaves to read. So the head of China, which has been a drag on the stock, the head of China has retired. I think we'll be getting news on what their plan is for China. Maybe maybe franchising. I don't know. Maybe status quo. But in the meantime, you've noticed a difference in the stores, and we think that'll start to show up in earnings and margins. So they've cut about 13 drinks, I think, out of the menu. They put the condiment bar back in, which was super important for me. And they're encouraging people to stay and sit, and they've started writing notes. Do you go to Starbucks, Arthur?
Do I go every once in a while.
Yeah, they're putting smiley faces back on your cup. So how can we go wrong? So I think this is one they just announced a dividend increase. So you're getting paid to wait. It has a healthy yield, about 2.6%, and they're growing the dividend pretty handily, low double digits, and that's great. You're getting paid to wait for the company to return to growth stock status. So that's one I really like. Again, a member of TGLR, one of our largest holdings in consumer discretionary. And then the other name is obvious, but Raytheon Technology. So Raytheon is a defense name. They had a little problem with, and an aerospace name. They had a little problem a while back with one of their engines, and so the coating on the engines that they provided, so they had to take a number of charges. But now the company is back to growth status. They had what's called a triple play. I wish I had coined that phrase, but it's a beat on earnings, beat on revenues, and raising on guidance this last quarter. And so the stock, there's the more recent chart, and you can see it's up quite nicely year to date. And that's important, I think, for investors as they're diversifying out their portfolios. So it is, I think, our largest holding in the industrial space in TGLR. And we think the company is going to continue to grow nicely for obvious other reasons, which is it's a very unsafe world. And we gave a lot of, or sold, I don't really know what the correct term is, a lot of our rockets and missiles to Ukraine. And so they're busy replenishing the stockpile, and that's going to continue to drive earnings growth. So that's my summary. Those are my 2 stocks to watch this week. And that's all I have, Arthur, unless you have anything else.
I got a question for you. So there's been a lot of talk about Tesla, Elon Musk, but Tesla also. And I just wanted, like, what do you think about Tesla in general? Being too expensive, kind of its day in the sun is kind of long behind it, whether it's the CEO is off the reservation or whatever. Like, what do you think of the company overall?
Yeah, so I made the fatal mistake of selling the stock after we got about a double or 250% increase when Elon was sleeping on the floor of the factory, and he was going on. This was his first Joe Rogan appearance, and he was smoking pot, drinking whiskey. And I was like, okay, there were no earnings back then. And, I just couldn't really see how after we really made money on the stock, how it wasn't gambling. So we took our clients' money out of it, and the stock went up 4-fold. So in the subsequent years, when he bought X, or Twitter at the time, he was selling Tesla stock, and that's when this is a stock that the shorts love to short. And it's a little bit in that regard a meme stock, which is why it's not in our 12 best ideas portfolio, though it is a great idea. If it weren't for the volatility, it would be there. And so we added back in at about $100 a share, 104, 108. And then every time the stock gets higher, up where we think it makes sense to trim, we do. And so we trimmed some last summer, early last year. We added back to it last summer. And then it was the only stock we sold in December because we wanted to preserve, our clients' taxable status. We didn't want to take a lot of gains in the end of the year, but we really felt like we had to take some Tesla off the table. And we just added back to it. So if I bought it at 240 and it's currently at 225, am I going to be unhappy when it's at 500? Absolutely not. And I think that is where the stock is going. It's always been overvalued. It's a story stock. There's a lot of Elon in the stock, but what we love about the name is that it's probably the largest AI company that you could, in terms of volume of AI that you could purchase. They just got approved for full self-driving in China. It will happen here. So I was at the CyberCab event. It was named after that Isaac Asimov, iRobot, I think is what it's called. Yeah. And so, it was long on cool and short on details. They've got the robotics, but they will deliver the Cybercab. I don't know if you know this, but a Model Y is now like $30,000.
Yeah.
So I've actually started to think about, wow, you could get one of those and have it be a town car. So I think the car is to the software and the AI portion of the business what the iPhone is to the whole Apple ecosystem and the services business. So I think you want to buy this stock when it's down, and it's a name you're going to hold for 5 to 10 years. And then lastly, we love the energy business. I went to the Mega Pack batteries. That's the electric utility grade battery. So now, the big knock on green energy was how do you store solar? When it's nighttime, you got to dip into the coal, source for energy. Now you can store it. That business grew at 50% in the third quarter, 100% in the fourth quarter, and is expected to grow 50% for the whole year this year. And it's the fastest growing, most profitable business. So, Elon's the guy everybody loves to hate. We'll take that opportunity to add to our holdings and then sell when everybody loves them again.
I'm waiting for the robots.
Oh, that's why home health quit. I know I can't count on you or my kids.
I want someone downstairs, like just going out, mowing my lawn, cleaning up the dishes, cleaning up after Juliet.
I want mine shaking a martini.
I want my major domo. Chop, chop.
Yeah, so that's coming. That's happening. So optimism. And it actually is expected to be a solution for home health care.
Oh yeah.
Or for home companionship for the elderly, which is what I am. So thank you. Thanks everyone.
Thanks everybody.
Yep, we'll see you next week.
See you next week.